Hello, my name is Michael Christie, Artistic and Music Director of Southern California's New West Symphony. Welcome to Program Insights for America, the Melting Pot edition of New West's Global Sounds Local Culture season. Lara Downes is on the forefront of the American music scene, a trailblazer both on and off the stage, charting a musical roadmap inspired by the legacies of history, family, and collective memory. As a chart-topping recording artist, a powerfully charismatic performer, a curator, and a tastemaker, Lara is recognized as a cultural visionary on the national art scene. Lara partners with the prominent composers of our day and a wide array of artists spanning all genres. Lara is also the host of National Public Radio's Amplify. Lara, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
It's great to be here.
In a piece you wrote for NPR, you wrote, when Duke Ellington famously coined the phrase beyond category, he was talking about freedom of choice, of expression, of belonging. He meant following your heart and your instincts into an artistic territory without borders. Following your heart has brought you to some amazing places. Take us on your journey.
I think it was learning to follow my heart, you know? I think that quote is in my head every day. I think all of Duke Ellington's quotes are in my head every day. He said some good stuff. But, you know, we talk a lot, I think, about authenticity and finding your voice. And that's not so easy to do, especially, quite honestly, in our world where we have this tradition behind us, you know, and so much of our training is devoted to that tradition. And you have to remember to look at yourself and listen to yourself. And I remember really clearly when that kicked in and set me on my journey. And it had a lot to do with identity, understanding myself, understanding where I fit in my world, in my music, in my country, you know, in my community. And then just realizing that there's so many stories to tell. And I think that music is such an amazing way to tell stories.
One of our local politicians recently said, instead of asking somebody where you're from, she said, ask them what their story is. And I think in today's atmosphere, where we are not only dealing with so many tragedies and so many changes, but we're looking at emerging from the COVID pandemic, what's the story that you hope to help tell as we transition back to more live experiences, coming through what we've all gone through together?
You know, I think the thing about stories is that they have common threads, right? We have our lives on this planet that have these prescribed milestones, and we all share that. And it's so easy to forget that in looking at the minutiae, right? This year, we all went through this together in this very strange way because we were so separated, and yet we were living the same reality every single day. And I think that has transformed us. I really do. And it's made us understand our connection and value our connection. I hope that that's true. I hope that we hold on to that.
Especially during the pandemic, diversity and representation in classical music has been elevated, and you play a critical role in that elevation. What do you imagine happening as we return to the concert hall, as we come up against those traditions, as we bravely embrace the people that we are, the country that we come from, the influences that we bring to bear?
I keep having my doubts about whether we can, and then I remind myself that we haven't been here before, that this is new. I really think that this attempt to really listen to each other's stories and to give voice to each other and to honor each other's stories, I don't think we've done this before. And I think that the moment we start to do it, we see the beauty, you know? It's so much more rich, and it pulls us all in. We can all find our place. I think that the problem that we have faced in classical music and concert music is that so many people feel outside of it, right? So many listeners, audiences, young musicians, and there are reasons for that. And if we can break that down and welcome everybody in, I think it immediately transforms itself into a much more interesting place to be.
And I suppose the connection between the online environment and our live environment, boy, these things are indelibly linked now.
Yeah.
They are connected.
Yes.
So what is your plan as you go forward? Because you are a busy concert pianist, you are a nationally broadcast personality, you are a researcher, you're a curator. How are you going to balance all that?
I don't know. Ask me a year from now. But I think that the one thing I want to hold on to every day in all of those activities is that you don't know who's listening. That's what I've loved about this year. You know, we put our work on the internet. We're speaking to the whole world. And I think that from now on, when I walk into a hall, I will know that what I do in that hall, yes, it's everyone who's sitting there physically, and it's everyone else. You know, it's everyone who's connected to everyone who's sitting here physically. Right. It's kind of like a galaxy shift or something.
Yeah. Do you welcome the fact that people outside of that space will see what happens in the moment? And I ask that because in the controlled environment that we've been in this year, where we can edit and we can record and we can pick, that's given us a tremendous amount of control over what people hear, how they hear, and the message that we send. When we go into live streams, when we go into the other things that enable us to bring a live audience in, how do you feel our industry is going to deal with that sense of exposure, in a sense?
But I think we've all been so vulnerable. And I remember really clearly the moment that I had to let go of sort of perfection or even assumptions about what was going to happen. One of the first things I had to do after everything shut down, I was supposed to go in early April to DC to film a Tiny Desk concert. And I had it absolutely programmed in my mind. I knew exactly what it was going to be. I'd spent so much time on it. We had planned every moment. And then, we held on, and then finally I got the call, you got to do this from home. And I remember sitting in my living room and just being so frustrated because I couldn't do that thing. Obviously, I couldn't do that thing. If I was going to try to do that thing, it was going to be very bad and awkward and weird. And I had to just let that go away and do this thing.
Right.
And I've loved that this year because the only thing I don't like about this environment is any kind of wall that's between us. When you're just in your living room and you're just being you, I mean, I've done some very messy things this year on camera. I think I've really valued the intimacy and the authenticity and the vulnerability, and I think my whole NPR show is about that. Yeah. And I think, I don't know, I think that as musicians we're more willing to show our true selves instead of the self that just, exists on the way from the dressing room to the stage and back again.
Yeah, I think we've been talking about that a lot. Mm-hmm. How can we let people know more about the rehearsal process, about the creative decisions that are being made? So yes, I also welcome that access because you're right. You don't know who's out there. You don't know who's going to say, oh, I see, if I am allowed to be creative. Yeah. I am allowed to make a decision in Beethoven or Bach just as much as in Ellington. One memory I have of hearing your voice on the radio has been learning more about various composers that have just sparked this interest for you. So I wonder what it looks like in your research environment. Do you just have a stack of music that you need to go through? Do you make time to play scores that have never been played? Are people referring things to you? Tell us about that background that eventually gives us the shows that we hear.
Yeah, well, I mean, for one thing, there's nothing more thrilling than trying out a manuscript that's been sitting in an archive for decades and kind of just feeling yourself bring it back to life. That's something truly staggering. The other thing is that I'm discovering a community. I have people writing to me who have been doing this research sort of on an amateur basis. And they have lists of composers that they've been compiling. I don't even, know with what outcome in mind, and they want to share. And so everything is blossoming and kind of exponentially growing. And, now the spreadsheet is like pages long. But that's the thing, too. That's the big discovery. And I'm trying not to use the word discovery because all this stuff was there. I'm not discovering anything. But like inner discovery is there's so much of this music. And that also changes what we think we know because as you know, we've got this body of work, we've got this canon, and then anything that we find outside of that tends to come with a story of, like, this was the one and this was the only, right? She was the first, he was the only, and then we think it's still this, and there are these isolated figures who pop up, but no. When you get into the world of music by composers of color, for example, it's a tradition. It's a lineage, it's a legacy, it's like connection and collaboration and teaching and passing on of things. And then you just see American music and concert music as a different thing.
I think that's a great segue into the Florence Price Concerto because when I hear the three parts, it's written as a concerto in one movement, but there are three movements basically. I can easily imagine any Germanic piano concerto. It's just that when we get to the second movement, suddenly you hear themes that are reminiscent of our early 20th century, late 19th century culture, our culture. And then certainly when you hear the third movement, we'll call it the third movement, the allegro, it is just as much of a folk inspired dance as you would hear in the Schumann concerto or the Grieg concerto or any of these other pieces. And I think I can't wait for people to hear this piece because as soon as they realize that it has the skeletal structure but just a different DNA, they're just going to be blown away by it. So what's your feeling about Florence Price's concerto?
What I love, we were talking about authenticity. When you think about her life and her career, she's trying to make a life in music as such an outsider, right? She's trying to be performed by the Boston Symphony. She's trying to enter into this world, which at that time was very white and very European and very male. She had the choice to write all three movements of that concerto as strictly romantic, European, virtuoso, standard, right? She didn't. Right. She let herself shine through. And I think it's a very bold choice, and it's also I can't decide if it's intentional or if it's something she couldn't help but do.
When you hear her other pieces, though, I think it's she couldn't help it.
Yeah.
Which is great, but at the same time, such a master of the instrument. What is it like to play pianistically? I think it must just fit right in the hand.
It fits right in the hand. And then, of course, I think about Florence Price, and I also think about Margaret Bonds, who played that piece for the first time, who is also this brilliant composer. And I think about these women. You called me a trailblazer. I'm not a trailblazer. Those were trailblazers, you know? To take everything that was available in that moment, and remember, it's the Chicago Black Renaissance, so there is this coming together of brilliant minds from all over the country, and they're collaborating and they're sort of escalating everything for each other. But to do so much with that time. And then I feel like, you know, we look back at, it's almost 100 years ago. It's just about 100 years ago. And then what happened in the meantime? You know, why did the music get lost? Why did those stories get lost? Bringing everything full circle now.
Yeah.
Eubie Blake wrote the show Shuffle Along, the first all-black hit show on Broadway. It opened in 1921, 100 years ago exactly. Langston Hughes called it the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance. There's something, I don't know, I'm a little superstitious or something, but here we are, you know, exactly 100 years later, and reimagining that piece. If you listen to the original cast recording, it's like a, you know, jazz hands bottle. I really wanted to honor the side of him that also had roots in the classical tradition, that probably wanted to stay more in the classical tradition and it wasn't possible, and just to let the beauty of the melody and the, you know, the intention come through. So it's, as you said, it's a moment to just, you know, grab onto this stuff.
We are so lucky that we have YouTube videos available of Eubie Blake, which I think it's a little haunting actually to watch, because it feels like 1921 is so long ago.
Yeah.
And of course these performances are much later in the 20th century, but still to have that connection. And he's so modest. He says, I'll try to sing this, I'll try to play this, and the audience goes crazy, and then they get very quiet, and then he just goes for it, and you think, what do you mean? Try what?
Yeah.
It's just amazing. So I was so inspired to know that we have a record of what that talent is. And the same is for Duke Ellington.
Right.
We have not only the commercial recordings, but we do have just the ad hoc recordings capturing the things that happened with the people he was playing with. So does that give you more, having those links, does that give you more maybe license to explore their works in different ways because they were doing that themselves?
Yes. Do you know, I'm sure you've seen this, there's this YouTube clip, I think it's 1965, it's Bernstein and Ellington, and they're sitting and they're basically having the conversation we're having now, really. They're talking about how different kinds of music are coming together, how jazz is entering the concert hall, how audiences are becoming more diverse. That's a long time ago. This conversation continues, and I feel like that's what we're doing. You know, we're continuing work. We're not pioneering anything. We're taking it further, which is what we're supposed to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So these people, I think, Leonard Bernstein, Duke Ellington, Eubie Blake, the list goes on and on. These role models, with all their flaws and all their victories and everything that happens, So who are your role models?
Those
as
two.
Okay, fair enough.
Those two.
Right.
Those two. Because they both believed that the music was in service of something bigger. They both did that, and they both did so much that they didn't have to do. Somebody pointed out to me that Bernstein did not have to knock himself out doing kiddie concerts. Kiddie concerts are hard to do. He had everything else he needed. He did that because he really wanted to inform and educate and nurture the next generation. And I think Ellington too, you know, there's still things we don't understand about the context of their time and the way they walked in the world, and I think they were both so brave and so committed. And I think as I discover this music, I'm finding my family, my people, you know. When you do things that are unexpected or unasked for, or somehow slightly trailblazing in music, you know you didn't make it up by yourself. And it's so wonderful to find the people who came before you, who did the big things. And Hazel Scott is such a great example. You know, she was classically trained. Again, that door wasn't open. She was this beautiful woman, and she was sort of, you know, taken over by the world of entertainment. But at first, on so many levels, she was the first Black American to have her own TV show. And then she stood up for her beliefs. She, you know, refused to play in segregated venues. And she really gave up a lot for that. The piece that I'm playing is called Peace of Mind. It's one of her original tunes that I had transcribed from her 1940s recording. And I was reading her testimony for the House Un-American Activities Committee, and she used those words. She said, you know, that basically people were being corrupt and sort of jeopardizing our peace of mind as Americans. That was just a moment of goosebumps. Yeah.
Lara Downes, thank you so much for sharing your insight, your passion for music, and I cannot wait to see what your trailblazing path leads you to next.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Summertime, and the living is easy. Fish are jumping, and the cotton is high. Oh, your daddy's rich, and your mama's good looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry. One of these mornings, you're gonna rise up singing. Then you spread your wings, and you'll take the sky. But till that morning, there's nothing can harm you.
I'm pleased to welcome Los Angeles-born tenor Ashley Faatoalia, who sang a ravishing performance for us as we recorded our presentations for American Melting Pot. Ashley, welcome.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for having me.
You're LA-based and born. Tell us a little bit about your story.
I am. I'm an LA baby, as they say. South Bay area is where I grew up, down in Torrance, and I went to school in Orange County. I finished at Chapman University a few years back, but I've stayed local, and I've been fortunate to work with the companies and groups here doing music and spreading the good times, as they say.
I think anytime a young person decides to pursue a career in music, it's a big decision. So how did you decide that your voice would be your profession?
Wow, that's a great question. I started out as a lot do, singing in school and in church, wherever I kind of was gathered for community purposes. Where there was music, I kind of found that entry and would find my way to the music groups. And finally, I kept doing it enough to where I found the right people and mentors and teachers who said, hey, what if you looked at this seriously and professionally? And I began to think about it. It also helped that my grandmother, actually, on my mom's side, was a recording artist with Capitol Records in the 60s. So I had a little understanding of the business, or at least an understanding of what was possible in terms of career in music. But I always sort of thought about myself as maybe an architect or doing other things visually, graphic design, but music was always sort of the thing that I just liked. And eventually I kept liking it and finding myself in the company of other musicians enough. And thankfully, I'm thankful for that I was guided to what I really feel was my calling is being in music and performing. So I was fortunate to find some teachers and mentors who really helped shape me in the beginning there.
So with that kind of a background, I think you probably gravitate to lots of different kinds of music. I know that you're working for LA Opera, but you've also worked for many companies in the region. Do you have other interests beyond opera as well?
I do indeed. I am known and making a name for myself as the crossover sort of artist, but in a different way, because I think that when we think of crossover, we think of sort of specific adult contemporary style music. But when I say crossing over, I mean into all other genres. The music, as you said, that I grew up with, the styles that I was influenced by leading up to discovering classical and training for operatic singing. But I love all of the styles that I grew up with. And so I do find myself doing contemporary gigs, and especially in LA, it's a great place to be as diverse as you can for this career, because there are always opportunities in film and television and in backup live touring gigs, live session gigs. There's really all kinds of opportunity for singers who can stretch themselves and bend a little bit. And I've always been that singer who likes to try the different things. I've never been too fearful or too apprehensive about stepping outside of my box vocally. And I think that really does, as you said, come from my background and sort of where I started. But I'm really thankful for that, because it helps me see the performance wherever I am, whatever moment I'm sharing musically, I think in a slightly different perspective, which is really great.
Well, when I heard you sing for our recording sessions, I really had this goosebump moment, because I could just feel your openness for your collaborator, Lara Downes. I could feel your openness to the message of the songs you were singing. I could feel your warmth for delivering it, even though it wasn't for a live audience, although there were 4 or 5 of us that were lucky enough to be your live audience. Take us into those songs a bit. Maybe we start with Margaret Bond's and the 2 songs that you sang for her, Dream Variation and He's Got the Whole World in His Hands.
First of all, thank you for your kind words. I think that's definitely what I set out to do, is to be open and to just be a conduit and to share through whatever channels I can. Speaking in terms of the selections by Margaret Bond's, the Dream Variations from the Dream Portrait Song Cycle that she collaborated with Langston Hughes on setting, I love that poem. and to hear it set to music. I had only recently, a few years ago, heard the setting by Bonds. I knew the poem, but oh, the setting just in my mind, it's like reading a poem and wanting to sing it, and then getting this music and seeing it and going, this is what I would have wanted to sing. This is a beautiful realization of this music, this text to music. So the Bond setting of the Dream Variations, I love because it really, in my mind, if you love the poem, you probably will love that setting. Everyone that I've ever done that piece for, or in the presence of someone who loves Langston Hughes poetry, but hasn't ever heard of the setting of this song, says the same thing. Oh man, I've got to hear that again, because it really, the poetry sings in its own way, but Bond's, oh my God, the music that she sets is unbelievable.
To fling my arms wide in the face of the sun, dance, whirl, whirl, till the quick day is done. Rest at pale evening, a tall, slim tree.
In terms of he's got the whole world in his hands, that's a spiritual that I think we all are familiar with, but I feel like the Bond setting is one that's sort of like quintessential now. It's becoming that way. And so I do it not only in honor of Bonds, of Margaret Bonds, but in honor of all of the African-American composers and arrangers. And I just think that its place in the canon, it hopefully is becoming more solidified, because I just think that arrangement it's sublime. If you've ever heard the spiritual, you know it, you know how it's usually done, and I think that's lovely. But Margaret takes time to do a lot of word painting, and it's just lovely to sink your teeth into as a listener, as a performer, and that's why I feel so open with those pieces, because I think Bond's settings are sort of invitations for the listener and for the audience. So I just feel like you follow her lead and you're in a good place. You're in a good place.
He's got you and me right in his hand. He's got you and me right in his hand. He's got everybody in his hand. He's got the whole world in his hand. He's got the whole world in his hand.
This flowering, this appreciation, this sense of ownership that everybody's starting to feel now toward bringing new composers and composers we should know more about back into the limelight.
I'm basking in the flowering, as you say. I think that's a great way to put it, because it is kind of like the seeds were already there, right? They were planted and watered, and now the time has come where we're sort of just enjoying and enveloping it with our arms, embracing it fully. I think that it's something to revel in, and I'm hopeful that I can be a performer, an artist, person in the community who can help perpetuate and solidify these composers and these works in the canon. As I said earlier, I think that in particular, the thing that I like about these composers, and I think any good composer, anyone that writes anything that's listened to multiple times or played over and over, remembered, it's got this, their music has a sense of familiarity. And I think that that's because of, obviously, it's been in existence for a while, but also there's just something about the good music that was written. I actually had the good fortune at my home church. One of the older choir members, we call them the senior saints at our church, one of them whispered to me years ago, and she said, in the back, in the library, there's a copy of a Bonds cantata that you should look at. And we actually pulled it out, and the Ballad of the Brown King was certainly sitting in the back of our church, tons of copies of it, and we did excerpts from it because I just thought, this is our chance, as you said, as this music is now taking its hold and we're enjoying it so much. This is my chance to just do a little something to help put this in its place, solidify it in our community and in our minds, in our hearts, even as something familiar. I'd love to have more of that done, traditionally at Christmas time, and other pieces that these composers wrote that are appropriate to do at different times of the year, traditionally, and keeping them for pieces for recital and for salon. I think that's the part that I love the most, is just, like you said, kind of being a part of the, not renaissance or rebirth, but just sort of the flowering and opening of all of this to the world. I'm excited to hopefully, like I said, be someone who can help the cause, because I'm fully behind the sort of unsung, unheard voices throughout our history, and we know there are many.
Well, there is a renaissance happening now, which does go back 100 years, the beginning, the Harlem of artists, composers, performers, many of whom started in Los Angeles and moved east, that then went into the civil rights era and now today. And I think what's wonderful about our long-awaited appreciation for just a huge number of wonderful African-American composers is that people were writing and are writing for Americans, which I think is wonderful.
Exactly. It's an American experience. And I think that's something that's really important to highlight, because I think it's important to highlight that these were African-American women in particular at the time, and the circumstances in which they worked and wrote their pieces and performed and all of that. But I think a bigger story even is that that's an American story, right? That we connect that is not just a Black experience, but it's the American experience, and that the American experience is a Black experience, and the Latinx experience, and the Asian American experience, and it's all of our experiences put together, and we recognize them as the melting pot experience that we all celebrate. And I think that particularly these works are ones that are seeing the light of day now, but I know that it's just the beginning. I hope that it's sort of the beginning of a good trend. As you said, we've got a whole renaissance of years now that we've been awakening to new music and new styles, and I think that it's about time we celebrate them a little more in the modern age. And I'm hopeful with concerts like this, with groups like your orchestra, that we would continue to see this happening more frequently, more commonplace.
Ashley Faatoalia, not only are you a great performer, but it sounds like you're a great mentor as well. So thank you so much for being part of our American Melting Pot and for spending some time with us today.
Maestro, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Double bass virtuoso Xavier Foley is known for communicating his virtuosity and passion for music on an instrument rarely presented in the solo spotlight. Xavier is the recipient of numerous awards, including the prestigious 2018 Avery Fisher Career Grant, New York's WQXR's 19 for 19 Artists Watch List, and featured on PBS. A native of Marietta, Georgia, Xavier's mentors include Hal Robinson of the Philadelphia Orchestra and another legend of the double bass, Edgar Meyer. Xavier is an ever-growing presence on the stage of orchestras around the country, and we are thrilled to welcome him to Southern California. Xavier Foley, welcome.
Thank you.
The double bass, I think, is just one of the most interesting and beautiful instruments because the capabilities are so varied. And I know that in order to play For Justice and Peace, for example, the way the instrument's physically set up is different than what you might see with the members playing at the back of an orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us a little bit of insight into what that mechanics of that would be?
Yeah, so a double bass is tuned where, I mean, for those of you who know, or maybe have perfect pitch, the top string's a G, and then D, and then A, and then E. That's normal tuning for a double bass. But my bass is tuned a whole step up for all of my open strings. So instead of a G, we're going to go up to an A. And so what this does, it creates a more vibrant, projecting sound. When it comes to physics, the string is more tense rather than more looser for the orchestral bass. And another thing to consider is that my bass is smaller. This is around a half size. It's a full size bass it's huge. And you know, a lot of people don't actually play them because they're that big, but you know, for those of who can, they can really shake the floor. But so that's the setup I have for now. Yeah.
So if you were to go back and play some of the other standard repertory for bass, would you use this instrument, or would you have a differently tuned bass?
So what I do, for example, a lot of people ask me to play the Trout Quintet.
Oh.
It's a very popular piece for bass, and I tune this down a whole step. Now, to get really into it, we have solo strings and we have orchestral strings. I have a mix. So the top string solo, the bottom three are orchestral. I'm playing in chamber music and orchestral music mostly on the low side. So that's why I have it set up. It's like a hybrid car. If you were to compare, so it kind of works out.
So when you need the propulsion, you've got the strings to give
you
that.
When I need a little extra kick, I gas it up, you know. But exactly.
So I take it then you are perfectly at home with the standard repertory as much as you are looking ahead to what music is going to bring for the instrument.
Yeah, I'm ready. For Justice and Peace was a joint commission from the Sphinx organization, Carnegie Hall, and the New World Symphony. And this is a double concerto for violin, bass as solo instruments, and the string orchestra. And this piece was a vision from Afa Dworkin, who's president of the Sphinx organization, to mark the 400th year ever since slavery began with the arrival of the White Lion ship that went to Jamestown, Virginia. So this piece was completed, and we went on tour with it in 2020. And one of the two notable things about this piece is that it has a gavel in it, which you don't really see, and the chorus, and the string performers are actually going to sing at the same time. So that's kind of hard, you know, but very effective. Some of the influences for Justice and Peace is spirituals. In the middle of the piece, it kind of turns into this very beautiful R&B section, which is very, it comes from African culture. That kind of thing. And you know, something I like to do is I kind of like to switch the influences. And so there's a little Latin American influence. Dun 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 dun, with the rhythms and the you know, that's kind of where that comes from. Some of the things I did that created tension was to create a lot of dissonant passages in the theme, which you will hear when me and Eunice start after the orchestra is done introducing us. And I kind of like to put different influences, and one of them is Latin American, with the the da 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 with these rhythms and that, yeah.
What is the role of music, whether composers or artists, at times of great challenge and hardship that we need to work through, both globally and in our homes and our neighborhoods? How do those conversations about race, power, and justice manifest themselves in music, and what do you hope for the future of that conversation?
Well, what's great about music is that we're able to translate how we feel. And sometimes emotions get very amplified, and the music would represent that. And a lot of the music we have been seeing in around 2020, 2021 have been a direct reflection of what's been happening in current day society. So I think it's great that what's going on these days is we're having a conversation about the role of music and how it can be a little more diverse and give voice to those who haven't necessarily been given a voice. And one of the things I think is pretty clear amongst leaders in the music industry, especially classical music, is that we tend to play a lot of the same composers, and there isn't really a chance to give voice to those who don't fit that kind of mold. The audience can now appreciate a lot of different styles and a lot of different points of view. Maybe in the future we'll start seeing different people in the audience, and I think it can really boost just more audience members in general, more ticket sales, and everything just gets better. Yeah. I think a lot of great things can happen in the future.
Yeah,
through change.
I think we have a lot of patterns to break, and a lot more. And we now have this opportunity post-pandemic to use the sense of rebuilding as a chance to engage people in conversations that are artistic.
Yeah.
So what do you imagine? What would be your optimum concert program if you were to create a program that said to the world, welcome, this is just going to be a great night of music played by folks on an acoustic instrument, and here you go. Do you have a sense of what that might look like?
Absolutely. And I always thought the only thing that makes classical music different from a rock concert or a hip hop show at a nightclub is that the music itself, it's more complex, and the listener is able to really pick up on nuances and make connections with a previous section, and the form is a little more advanced, rather than the typical, it's more listening. The listening part's more essential. So that being said, as long as you're presenting music that it's very fine and it has a lot of thought put into it, I don't see the problem of having each piece be something just different in general. Yeah. It's like that video game I was talking about. You have certain stages, and each stage has a certain soundtrack to it. The way I see it is you can have a program where things are different, and the audience can enjoy that contrast and walk away thinking, yeah, that was a good concert. I heard a lot of different things. Yeah. Irish Fantasy. This is it's based off a folk song called The Clergyman's Lamentation. And I heard this through a video game called Fate for the PC, Windows. And I actually didn't know that it was a folk song when I listened to it 11 to 12 years ago. I didn't even know it was a song. I just thought it was something that played. But when I was in Curtis, I searched up the theme of the Fate OS soundtrack, and it came up. It was actually a folk song. And so I decided, why not just make a piece out of it, a full-blown work? And I used the folk song, and I take the listener through all these variations, and I have a little bit of bluegrass influence in there too. And so that's Irish Fantasy for you.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you, New West Symphony colleagues and all guests of Program Insights for America the Melting Pot. This program and the other presentations of this festival are available for you to view again as often as you like on the New West Symphony Virtual Concert Hall via the New West Symphony website.